B2B buyers are leaving clues on the web that they are in market. Can you find them? This is Hellbent on Intent, where we sit down with experts, users, and skeptics to get to the bottom of intent data. Our goal is to break down what intent data is, what it isn't, how it works, and what it means for B2B technology marketers. My name is Tukan. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone. My guest today is Andre Yi. Andre is the Chief Product Officer at Foundry. Welcome to the show, Andre.
Thank you, Tukan. Appreciate it. Always enjoy chatting with you.
Awesome. So I guess before we get started, Andre, I personally know you for a while now, and I am aware of your background. But for the audience, can you tell a little bit about your background and how it's related specifically to MarTech?
Sure. So I won't go back too far because I've had a lot of different jobs, but related to MarTech, I was the Senior VP of Product Development for Eloqua. So it was in the early days of marketing automation, and that was a fantastic run with a really fantastic team. Really enjoyed it and learned a lot, not only about MarTech, but about leadership, about how to build a company and all the things that are really important in business, build a great culture. We had a great exit. We went public, and then we had a great exit to Oracle. And Eloqua actually became part of the foundation of Oracle Marketing Cloud. I didn't stay at Oracle for very long because I wanted to go do a startup, and that led me to starting Triblio, which didn't start as an ABM company, to be quite honest. In the early days, like all startups, were trying to find product market fit, but we did fairly quickly find our way to account-based marketing, and then had a great run, and we exited to Foundry about 18 months ago, and I'm now the Chief Product Officer at Foundry. So
awesome. Cool. And I happen to know a little bit about Foundry, so we are not going to go into that. But we did some research prior to the call, and we found this very interesting article that you wrote on Forbes, where you talk about the death of the third-party cookie. What are the high-level thoughts that you're thinking when the third-party cookie goes away, and what it means to a B2B marketer?
Yeah, I wrote that article obviously last year when it was really everyone's focused on third-party cookies, and I think Google has since given everyone a little bit of a reprieve. Yeah, they pushed the date out of the. But the first thing I probably should say about the demise of the third-party cookie is that it's a good thing, right? I think third-party cookies have been helpful in marketers being able to reach large audiences, but not always well targeted. There are a lot of issues with the use of third-party cookies. And you say, what remains and how do I prepare for it? And then what you'll have, if you project ahead, what becomes really, really important is really being able to have access to platforms with first-party audiences. And when I say first-party audiences, what I really mean is audiences that have been permissioned. Permissioned audiences that are willing to receive relevant information. And when you think about that, there are only certain platforms that have enough scale. So for instance, social media networks tend to have that. The other would be platforms that are broad publication networks, like the one that Foundry has, for instance, about 20 plus sites that focus on IT-related topics. It allows advertisers and marketers to reach a permission targeted audience at scale. And so my advice is one of the things you should do is to start to invest in using those platforms for targeting purposes.
That totally makes sense. So first party, obviously, as you mentioned, helps with the accuracy and also addresses a privacy concern. What about scale, Andre? Do you see if you cannot match it to a third-party cookie, you're automatically limited to how you can target them or across multiple topics and match their activity on different sites? How does that impact like a B2B marketer from that perspective?
Yeah, I think when you look into the future, obviously investing in what I call these first party platforms and being able to advertise and reach their audiences are important. The other is that if you look and you say, what are the ways that I can reach audiences at scale in general with good targeting? You're going to find that instead of just using third-party cookies, you're going to have to use a combination of different technologies and data. So being able to target with IP related data. And I know there's some people think about IP data and they think of all the problems in terms of accuracy, but I think that's kind of like the way IP data was 10 years ago or 10 years ago. Today's sort of, there's been a lot of progress in the use of IP to company data, and it's a very valid way of targeting. The other is contextual targeting. So I think the future of sort of reaching audiences at scale will involve a hybrid of both of these technologies: the use of first-party audiences, the use of IP targeting, the use of contextual advertising, and so it's going to be a hybrid approach to get audiences at scale.
Got it. So now moving on from talking about audiences, third-party cookie that is helping build audiences. One of the big use cases of intent data is building highly targeted audience for marketers to target. Like that is one of the use cases. Yeah. When you're thinking of intent, Andre, how should a B2B marketer think of intent data when they're thinking from first, second, third party, top of the funnel, lower funnel? What do you see there?
I think a lot of people years ago, when you would say, and maybe even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, when you would say intent data, what most people think about is what I would call third-party intent.
Yes.
So, and the idea is that you just want to be able to buy one intent package. And I think in the last few years, marketers have learned a few things about intent through as practitioners started to use intent. And one of the things I think everyone's come to conclude is that there's no single source of just one intent. Like there are multiple, what I call the multi-dimensions of intent. So when I talk about multi-dimensions of intent, I mean that some of the common dimensions I talk about is you need both first party as well as third party intent. So meaning first party intent, meaning what are the intent signals that come from your campaigns, your website, as on the client side. Third party intent is what's happening in the rest of the world, rest of the web. And so you need both first party and third party. You need really upper funnel and lower funnel intent. They serve different purposes. So upper funnel intent sometimes is not as accurate, but it gives you some of those early signals. Lower funnel is maybe a little more accurate if you see people come to your website multiple times, or they go to a product eval site. Those are strong lower funnel intent signals. But the problem is that you may be seeing too few of those or too late in the cycle, right? So you need both. And then finally, the thing that no one talks about is you also need both online as well as offline, or what sometimes I call verified intent. So you need online intent, meaning did they read this article? Did they watch this video online? But the idea of verified intent is really important because people attend events, they go to user groups, they will sometimes go to live events, although we haven't done a lot of that over the last couple of years. But this idea of being able to combine both online event signals with sort of offline signals is important. So this multi-dimension is usually what I talk about. And that's actually as what we're trying to do at Foundry with our Neon product, is to actually address the sort of multiple dimensions of intent data.
I'm going to ask you a couple follow-up questions to what you mentioned, Andre. So you talk about the upper funnel, lower funnel. Lower funnel, one example you gave was someone coming to your website and clicking on a pricing page or opening your email 5 times. That would be an example of a lower funnel activity, right? What would be an example of other lower funnel activities that is not on first party?
I would say going to a product eval site is...
So like G2 Crowd or something?
Yeah, G2 Crowd or others like that. No one's perusing a product eval site just for the kicks. Hey, it's a slow afternoon. Let me just go to a product eval site. No one
or doing competitive intelligence. That's the other way.
They're usually comparing vendors. They're trying to get validation, pure validation. The other lower funnel signal, intent signal, isn't so much a destination as much as it's a type of content that you might interact with. So for instance, you might go to CIO.com, one of Foundry's media sites. If you just happen to read a general news article, that's upper funnel. But if there's a section that talks about 5 things before you purchase your CRM, or buyer's guide on a security product, that I would say is lower funnel intent signals when someone downloads that or reads that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because the kind of content, so it's not just a destination, it's really the type of content that you interact with.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that is something that intent data vendors, whoever is doing all the different vendors need to get better at, is treat the kind of content we normally it's basically looked at how frequently they're engaging, how many people, but not necessarily a lot of importance on what kind of content it's being.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the reason why I use this phrase multi-dimensions of intent, because I think everyone in the first few years treated intent kind of like, I would say, very flat. In other
Yeah.
words, all the
Yeah.
same.
Single dimension. Yeah. Someone reading an article about Snowflake's stock market performance, that doesn't mean they're interested in a data
Yeah.
warehousing product just because understand the context of the content is an important.
Yeah, I think in general, when you think about as a B2B marketer, one challenge is sort of like, do I have enough intent signals that are different and just do I have these multi-dimensions of intent? The other is, just because you have the signals doesn't mean that you can understand them. So making sense of those signals is a very important dimension of this, if you would. So just the example you gave, right? Like, so Snowflake has a spiking in the stock market doesn't mean that's a buying opportunity for the selling opportunity. So being able to make sense of that signal comes down to, is there a scoring model that is driven by a machine learning based score, right?
Yeah. You talk about verified intent. When we think of intent, every kind of intent that you talked about, first party, second party, third party, it's still inferred. The customer, the user who's visiting the website is not actually telling you I'm interested in buying.
Yeah.
You are inferring. And the more signals you see, the more kind of behaviors you see, you get more confidence on that predictiveness of it. No one has actually verified it until that's been passed over. You talk about verified piece of it. And can you talk a little bit more about it? Like, how do you verify intent data and how do you do that at scale?
Yeah, well, scale is obviously the problem. And I should probably say, once again, it's not just a single intent. It's not like just because someone went to, a seminar or
Sure.
that. It's really how you combine that with other signals. So just to give you an example, that's kind of the trivial example is if someone was on CIO.com and they were reading an article on CRMs, for instance, like what you should know before you purchase your next CRM.
Yep.
That's really interesting.
Yep.
That's a strong signal.
Yep.
But if you also know that they went to a sales and marketing conference and they send their director of sales ops to attend a session on CRM, 5 steps for CRM migration, effective CRM. That's a confirming signal, and it's particularly a confirming signal because there's a person that you can tie it to, registered for an event, showed up at an event with a particular title that you tie back to the prospective account. That's really powerful to have that. That's why I mean with verified, is that someone actually showed up, a real person, not a visit. Obviously, that behind the visit is a person, but not just a visit, but someone sat in a session at a conference and spent 40 minutes learning about how to migrate CRMs. That's a lower funnel signal. They're already thinking, I'm going to switch up my CRM. I want to know how to migrate. So that's a trivial example, but that's just having verified sort of intent is a very strong confirming signal.
Would verification also mean, Andre, someone is downloading a piece of content from wherever website, and in one of the questions is, let's say, are you thinking of buying CRM software in the next 6 months? And they say yes. Would that data point be a verification of verified them?
I guess you could say it that way. Usually when I say that thing verified, I'm really talking about offline signal. In other words, how do you connect it with the rest of the world? We have lots of in-person interactions, whether it's over the phone or over what we are doing, right? I'm actually talking about specifically validating that this ties back to a particular person that you've confirmed is within reason through
in a,
live,
in a non-digital channel.
yeah, in a non-digital channel, exactly. And it's
Okay,
the thing, by the way, no one's really talking on focused on, but it's actually a very important dimension
for
of
sure.
intent, right?
the I think it will be the strongest form of intent, because if you come to my booth and you say, hey, I'm interested in this, and
Yeah,
that's a data point you logged down, or I called you and said, hey, Andre, are you looking to buy a next gen
yeah,
firewall or something like that, and you say, yeah, we are thinking about it.
yeah.
That data point is very, but the problem, I guess, is how do you get enough of them at scale
Yeah.
across
So,
multiple
so I
industries?
don't, and yeah, obviously, and that's why you probably can't just lead with verified.
True.
I usually say it's more like a confirming signal, or it's a supportive signal to
Understood.
the primary signal, but it's important.
Oh, 100% agree. Cool. So now we talked about different kinds of intent. Thank you for that. Now let's come to ABM. This is an interesting area for me personally, because one of the use cases of intent data we see is clients using it for their ABM program. Now, being being the founder of an ABM company, where does intent fit in the whole ABM world?
Yeah. So, the reason intent is so important, let me just start with that. The reason it's so important is that if you look at just trends, people are delaying form fills. And back when I was at Eloqua, the form fill, the contact registration form, was the primary first signal that says, oh, I give you permission to contact me. Now people are delaying that. They're not actually filling that out until the very much later in the selling cycle. They also don't respond to ads as much, by the way. Click-through rates on ads have gone down and that kind of thing. So what that means is that for a marketer, B2B marketer, discovering who should I target, who's in market, is a very, very important, sort of very strategic problem that you have to tackle. You have to have an answer to that really strategic question. Now, in ABM, when ABM started, account-based marketing started, it was all about targeting accounts in a target account list, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, what I call old school ABM was about really a very small target account list. And I won't go into reasons why I think that's a really niche part of ABM. There are places where you should target. There are times where you implement ABM and you should only do like a dozen accounts, because it's very deep one-to-one account based marketing. In general, though, to make ABM scale, you're usually targeting hundreds, if not thousands, of accounts at times, and you can make that work. However, I think markets have become more sophisticated. And when you come up with a list of 1,000, usually it's based on firmographic parameters. It's saying they're in a particular industry, they're a particular size, a particular revenue. Those are all still valid. But what markets have started realizing, and by the way, when you made those lists, those were kind of static targeting, right? Static. They don't change for, let's say, hey, I'm launching this for the next 3 to 6 months. Yeah. It's a fixed list. Marketers have become a lot more sophisticated, because the question isn't, just around the firmographic parameters. If I have 1,000 accounts, it's great that I could potentially target, and I may, but when I start to try to connect that with it's not just a question of who might buy from me, but who's in market for what I have right now, who's showing intent for what I'm selling right now. And that's the problem that intent data helps solve for ABM marketers, right? Yeah. So who am I, who should I target right this week?
I say this phrase sort of half jokingly, saying just because they're in your target account list doesn't mean they're in the buying stage.
Yeah, no,
right?
That's
so
true.
And by the way, the way you describe that part of why intent matters, that people are not filling out forms and ads are not working. So how do you early on in the journey so that you can reach out to them, is a great way of describing why intent data matters to marketers. Yeah. So now let me ask a question then, Andre. So let's talk about the operationalizing piece of intent. So a marketer comes and they have, in an ABM platform, they have a list of 1,000 accounts they have decided. And intent data is telling them who to target based on, and it's dynamic, it's changing every day. How does a marketer then, using an ABM platform, activate the data? What are the different channels?
Yeah, so I think if you start using intent data, your very next challenge is, how do I operationalize it? Which is essentially what you're asking. How should marketers operationalize it? And when you're operationalizing it, you're trying to figure out which accounts should I target? And we just talked about how intent data can really sharpen that targeting, not just around firmographic parameters, but really around who's in market right now. This idea of a dynamic targeting list is kind of what people are more forward-thinking ABM practitioners are doing today. The second thing is what accounts I should target. The question is, who specifically in those accounts should I? It's what I call the last mile in intent, which is if I know that these accounts are showing interest, the very next question I have is who in those accounts. It's the last mile. It's people, like who specific. It's great to know. Let's just say Morgan Stanley is looking for a new CRM. That's great, but who in Morgan Stanley? There are like so many sales ops people and marketing ops people. Who specifically, right? So that the idea of the last mile of intent is who, the specific person, and then the other thing is how do I reach them? And that's where a really good ABM platform that allows you to actually orchestrate your campaigns to reach the right people at the right time and being able to specifically target them with the right messaging at a particular stage. So you think of it as multi-channel as well as multi-stage orchestration. So the ability to do that is highly important. And that's what you need to do to be able to operationalize your intent data.
Totally. So now I want to go deep into this, Andre. So let's say there were 1,000 accounts. Let's say intent data told you there's 100 of them that are showing intent. Out of those 100, let's say you identified the buying decision completely, the who, the last mile, as you said. And let's say there is, on an average, is 5. So there's 500 people within these 100 accounts that you should be targeting. From an operationalizing perspective, what are the 2 or 3 channels that a marketer does with that information?
That's really a good question. So what we see a lot of people doing is they will use digital ads. That could be social, but more likely, to be honest, it's just account-based display ads. So that's one channel that's used usually as air cover to get your brand focused. The second is email, although we're seeing more and more people not use email in the traditional sense, but more through what I call the sales cadence tools like Outreach and SalesLoft and the like. And then the thing that people forget is if you're successful in getting their attention, what are they going to do? They're going to come to your website. So personalizing your website's a very crucial channel that people don't think about. But if I'm down to this in your example, 500 individuals that I'm really targeting this week or over the next couple of weeks, if they truly are in market and they see my ad or they hear and they're truly in market, some of those 500 are going to show up at my website. How am I personalizing that messaging on my website to be relevant to them and engage them, right? And then the last channel that sometimes people don't think of a channel is the channel, which is your BDR team or your sales team, right? So being able to operationalize this idea of what accounts should I target this week, which we just talked about, but also what do I say when I target them? So the ability to orchestrate not just lead distribution, but I would say intelligent lead distribution, meaning being able to send to them when you say to a particular AE or BDR, follow up on these accounts. And by the way, here's what they're interested in based on their activity on the website or their response to the campaigns. And here's the play that you should run. You can pair that up. So this idea of really smart orchestration is really important and can be the edge that you have over your competitors.
You talked about the different stages. One thing I'm curious in understanding is where does marketing automation fit into this from a nurture perspective with operationalizing this data?
I mean, ABM platforms are a form of marketing automation.
Yes.
Platforms, but are you asking specifically about email? So like the Marketos,
Eloquos of the world.
Yeah, so there's still a very important part of this. When I said one of the channels that you should use is email, I did mention that a lot of people are starting to use email in the form of the sales cadence tools. That's traditional email marketing automation with Eloquent Marketo is still important and part of that channel. So you might have a multi-channel or cross-channel campaign that might involve your website, running ads, your website, as well as using, say, Marketo or HubSpot, and then also at the right time. And the entire time you're scoring account activity, at the right time you want to trigger a follow-up for your BDR team or your AE team. And that's sort of the channel where you might want to orchestrate not only distribution of that lead to AE, but also pairing it up with insights and a sales play that they should run.
Okay, I have two questions follow up to what you mentioned, Andre. One of the things was display ads, like as a targeting, paid social and display ads. Does the third party, going back to your original first point, the third party cookie, does that impact the display ad targeting?
Yeah, eventually that will impact when the third-party cookies. A lot of times when people are using display ads today, they are leveraging third-party cookies.
Yes.
Although we see more and more of our customers also using our capability to do hybrid targeting, using a combination of third-party cookies as well as first-party as well as IP targeting, right? So you will today the preponderance is still third-party display ad targeting. I think in the future it'll move to the world that I was talking about earlier, which is a combination of being able to use social media, social networks, targeting on social networks, targeting with first-party platforms, as well as using other techniques like IP-based targeting or contextual-based targeting.
One question, this I don't know if it is even possible. Someone asked, one of the marketers, a B2B very savvy marketer, one of the questions that he brought up to us was he was running targeted advertisement to a target account list. And one of the things he said was the company, this ABM platform was reporting on the clicks. So there's like they were reporting on impressions saying, hey, these accounts were shown an ad and these many people clicked. But one thing he kept asking was, he wanted to know that last mile piece of it. He's like, yeah, you're telling me you're targeting 100 accounts. I have no data to believe you. And you're telling me there are 7 clicks. I don't see any meetings booked, but I'd love to know who those 7 clicks came from.
Yeah.
Is it even possible to get that insight?
Well, I don't know about the actual clicks. I think, but what I will say is that being able to identify um, who might have interacted, I would say don't focus on the specific clicks, but the fact that this account is showing a lot of interest.
Sure.
And what you really, really need to know is who are the people that are showing interest within those accounts, not necessarily the one person that may or may not have clicked. I think it's more important to be able to tie it to the buying group of that, as much of the buying group as possible. And in that respect, that's why we really love that the LeadSift product when let Foundry to acquire the LeadSift product, is because that's something you guys recognized early on, which is it's not just a question of the accounts that are surging, but how do you tie it to specific contacts or specific individuals that are, probably recommended individuals that you should reach out to.
So from a targeted advertisement perspective, Andre, you mentioned going back to the example of Morgan Stanley that you said. So let's say you target Morgan Stanley with an ad and you are seeing a lot of activity, and it's important to know who are the people who are showing the activity, and the way to do that, this from an advertisement lens, is would the only way be if you upload a list of the buying decision committee members, match them to some kind of a device ID or email or something, unique identifier, and that you're only targeting those specific people within Morgan Stanley who are the decision committee. So any activity that you see on the ad, you can infer it is from that group of people.
Well, I think, well, I can speak to just maybe the way our ads work.
Sure.
With Triblio, is that we have the ability for you to target by role or by contacts. So you could load up let's say at Morgan Stanley, you have a list of 10 contacts that you think are the kind of people you want to talk to. You can, within our system, you can load them up, but you can also say, I want you to target others with similar titles and roles to the group that I'm, and what our system will do, will find in a privacy safe way, we'll be able to find other like titles and contacts and be able to allow you to target them via display ad, right? So That will become more difficult when third-party cookies go away naturally, because you are leveraging third-party cookies at times. Sometimes you can leverage first-party cookies as well, but if you use these first-party platforms I'm talking about, so.
Understood. One thing you mentioned was around the personalization piece. That's interesting. When you think of ABM, no one thinks of, well, I have not heard too much people of, once your goal is to bring them to a landing page and then personalizing it, right? You
Yeah, it
mentioned
may
that.
be not just a landing page. I think it's more likely. I mean, I think what we should think about is what is the behavior
Yeah.
when someone shows intent.
Yep.
If hey, here are, my target list is 1,000 accounts. This week, 100 accounts are in market, and you start running ads. You start an outreach program using email and maybe a calling program. If you're right that there are these 100 accounts are in market, I guarantee a large proportion of them, if you start stimulating their interest with ads and emails and possibly even outbound calling, they're going to come to your website.
Yes.
If I'm actively in purchase and someone during that time captures my interest with what I'm thinking about for that buying cycle, which is which product should I be focused on, bring in for an eval, for instance. If you happen to run, I am going to go to your website.
Yep.
And I think I don't know why we don't think about it, but that's a very important
Agreed.
touch point. And being able to personalize messaging, being able to give the user a relevant and meaningful experience when they're there is very, very important, right?
So from a personalization perspective, web personalization, let's say, do you think of personalization more at the firmographic level? So if it's Morgan Stanley, the kind of content is finance related, or is it more on the topic they're showing intent on? That's what
it could be both. I would say, why do you choose, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, there's no one right answer. Someone could say, look, the way I lay out my campaigns are by verticals. So when they come, if they're in financial services, then I want to show them other testimonials from financial services companies. I want quotes from customers
Yep.
in their sector.
Yep.
I want to be able to show them that I understand their world with all the different compliance regulations, for instance,
Yep.
right? On the other hand, you might also use intent so if they come based on different intent topics, they directly come based on a particular campaign, then you can also personalize on that basis. But I will say that I think one of our customers use case I saw once was that they used the intent topic as a proxy for the kind of role. So for instance, if someone was responding to them, it was a CDP vendor, and they found out that if someone responded based on the keywords CDP, it tends to be a technical buyer. So they personalize the website more for the technical buyer with technical topics and that kind of thing, a little more geeky. They realize that person is usually a marketing ops person or sometimes even from IT. On the other hand, if someone responded based on keywords like customer success, customer experience, they tend to be either a customer marketer or a customer success person. And so they would so that's one way that people have used intent, is to use the intent as a proxy for different roles sometimes. There are many ways to use intent, but that was an example I wanted to just share.
That is very interesting, because when we think of intent, being an intended, we don't really think of web personalization in context with ABM. This is very interesting. So I do have to ask you, Andre, are you hell-bent on intent?
I'm absolutely hell-bent on intent.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andre. Cool. If you like this video, please drop us a like. Let us know what you think of it. And if you're hell-bent on intent, click on the link in description to stay updated when each new episode drops. See you there.